Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Morrill blows the whistle and Borrell orders European navies into the Taiwan Straits. When did he get the power to do that? But that is what he has done. The chief of the military staff of mighty Estonia has declared that Russia must be broken up into small pieces of sundry independent states. Unless repudiated by the government of Estonia, that sounds like a declaration of war to me. Next time you hear unprovoked, keep that statement in mind. Morrill says that he was told by Antony Blinken, then a chief official of Joe Biden's presidential campaign, to rig up the fake news that the Hunter laptop story was Russian disinformation, and boy, did he do so. Borrell says that the European navies must patrol our frontier, which has moved from Poland all the way to China. And of course, the letter CIA, like the letters through a Blackpool stick of rock, are littered throughout the remainder of this show. Keep your seatbelts fastened the whole time, because it's going to be a bumpy night, that I promise you, because this truly is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows, the only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The flagship aircraft carrier, Prince Charles, is being cannibalized for spare parts. It has never worked since the day that it was launched, breaking down in port, breaking down a second time in the Isle of Wight, within eyeline of the people who'd seen it abortively launched in the first place. So wrecked is it that it is no longer functional. Well, sing hallelujah, because it will not be able to be sent by the so-called foreign minister of the so-called European Union into the Taiwan Straits, in startling developments over the last 24 hours. The foreign minister, Borrell, has declared that China is our frontier, that Taiwan is not part of China, even though his own government, all the governments of the European Union, the British government, the United States government, and the United Nations consider it so to be. But it can't be if it is our frontier, and yet that is what he has encouraged European navies to sail in the Taiwan Straits. Now, I've said this before, some people don't like it. Some people in China don't like it. But if I was running China, I would sink these ships. These ships have no business in China's internal affairs. Taiwan is an integral part of China. What China does in Taiwan is as much its business alone as what the United States government does in Texas is its business alone. Actually, even more, because Texas was stolen by the United States off Mexico in the first place. I'm not even talking about a comparison with Taiwan or Puerto Rico. I'm talking about an integral part of the Chinese People's Republic. At least that is what all the governments of the world consider to be the case. And yet they ramp up and up and up the military and psychological pressure on China. And here's my guess: it will not end well for them, any better than it is ending well in the Ukraine. China will, I think, decide, perhaps has decided, that it is going to end this Taiwan problem before Taiwan gets any more pumped up with NATO weapons and is surrounded by more and more NATO naval assets. So it might just be a case of being careful what you wish for. I believe that China had no intention of taking back Taiwan into the motherland by force, but they may well be forced to do so if this continues. We'll see and keep it constantly under review. The war in Ukraine is going from bad to worse. The spring offensive that later became the summer offensive may now have been postponed until the autumn. The truth is, despite all the huffing and puffing of NATO capitals and the chancelleries of Europe and North America, Ukraine is not in any position to take significant land back from the Russian forces that are now there in overwhelming numbers. And neither would the people of the territories now returned to the Russian motherland be prepared to accept it. That doesn't stop some of the stray dogs, like the government of the United Kingdom, constantly hyping for more. But Zelensky now, to me, looks a tired and beaten man, already on the deck chair on the beach of his next port of call, which may be Florida, may be Tel Aviv, may be both of them. But the war drags on, and the poor people of Ukraine are being sacrificed in what Robert Kennedy Jr. said this week was a proxy war. Kennedy is off and running with his presidential bid, and he's made a terrific start. He demanded the release of Julian Assange and the dropping of all the charges against him. He declared that the Ukraine war, in which his own grandson was a mercenary on the Ukrainian side, to be that proxy war, and vowed that if president, he would end United States involvement in the war. All very important when you consider the big issues that we are going to consider tonight. I make no apology for the fact that tonight is more or less all about America, more or less all about the CIA, and here is why. The world changed at 9/11. No one could seriously doubt that. Everything that we are now facing, we are facing as a result of 9/11, of the subsequent invasions of Iraq and of Afghanistan, the disastrous occupations of both those countries, the desire to put in power in Libya and then in Syria the very people who carried out the atrocity on 9/11 is something that historians will surely puzzle to explain to future generations. But if everything changed after 9/11 for everybody, then everybody has an interest in knowing exactly what happened on 9/11. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And who made it happen? This week, in journalism that would win a dozen Pulitzer Prizes, The Grey Zone and Kit Klarenberg, the investigative journalist, a countryman of mine, broke the news from court depositions in the United States that two of the hijackers on 9/11 were people working with the CIA. The word agents we'll explore, but they were in contact with and they were dealing with the CIA in the months and weeks and days and hours prior to the hijacking of those airplanes and the catastrophe that happened in New York, in Washington, and almost elsewhere on 9/11/2001. If true, it is the biggest story ever. Think about that. If it is true that this disaster occurred not only because of the inability of the FBI and the CIA to engage in joined-up writing, not only did it happen because of an insane rivalry between these two institutions, fundamental to the American Republic, but that one of those two institutions was running two of the people who boarded the aircraft and took control of them and flew them into the Twin Towers. That is the biggest story ever, isn't it? Because if true, it means potentially that this entire thing, either wittingly or unwittingly, was to an extent at least an inside job, which would change the perceptions of everybody in the United States if only they were allowed to read it, if only they were allowed to see it. Well, on the mother of all talk shows, even if nowhere else, they will be able to hear and see from the author of the piece himself. The other CIA story is, if anything, more vitally, urgently, and contemporaneously important. I have hated the CIA all of my adult life. I first came into contact with them personally when a man called Philip Agee ran for the rectorship at the university in the town where I lived and worked. He was, according to the whistleblower. My then party colleague Brian Wilson, who was himself a former rector of the university, I think, he brought Philip Agee to Dundee and ran a spirited rectorial candidate, sure. And I got to know a lot from Philip Agee about the inner workings of the Central Intelligence Agency. I then watched them in the many crimes that they have committed since I was 18 years old at the time. The CIA have committed crimes all over the world, but it is relatively new, at least from the second half of the 20th century, that they began committing them on a significant scale in the United States itself. The CIA was the organization that President John F. Kennedy promised to shatter into pieces and scatter, just before they shattered his head into pieces and scattered his brain on November 22, 1963, which is the date, I believe, that the American Republic died. Kennedy's anger was caused by the emergence of the obvious truth that they had been lying to him about the Bay of Pigs fiasco, when mercenaries coordinated, paid for, and militarily assisted by the United States of America invaded and tried to occupy Cuba, were roundly defeated by the Cuban people, and President Kennedy gravely embarrassed. The CIA killed John F. Kennedy, in my view. I believe they also killed Martin Luther King. I believe they also killed Malcolm X. I believe they also killed Robert Kennedy Sr. on his way, surely, to becoming President of the United States. That's a lot of very high crimes indeed in just one decade in the 1960s. And they didn't stop lying, cheating, stealing, and killing, and rigging ever since. Now this week, a mild-mannered man called Morrill, not to be confused with the rabid dog Borrell, who is the Foreign Affairs chief at the European Union, revealed under testimony to the Security and Intelligence Committee of the US Congress that he had been tasked by Antony Blinken, now the Secretary of State of the United States of America, but then merely a head functionary of Joe Biden's presidential campaign, to spin the lie and organize a conspiracy to spin the lie that Hunter Biden's laptop was an act of Russian disinformation, knowing that to be untrue. In fact, everyone involved, including the FBI, knew that that was untrue from the beginning. And thus, a conspiracy to deceive the American public through the American media, legacy media, as well as the so-called alternative media, social media, because Twitter was up to its eyeballs at that time in this conspiracy. The moral CIA, he was then acting director of the agency. The moral CIA set about their job with gusto. They rounded up no less than 51 senior, many of them famous, 3 of them former directors general of the CIA, to go on the front page of every newspaper and every single news bulletin on every channel in the United States of America, to say that the Hunter laptop story was a piece of Russian disinformation and should be entirely disregarded. In fact, the New York Post, which broke the story in the first place, had its Twitter account taken down for persisting that its story was true. Many people had their accounts blocked on Twitter and on Facebook for insisting that this story was true. And in fact, it became impossible in the closing weeks of a presidential campaign to talk about, on mainstream media or on social media, a story of such grave importance that it cannot but have influenced the outcome of the presidential race in 2020. Because what was in Hunter Biden's laptop was not just utterly devastating in public relation terms about the crack-smoking, whore-using son of the putative president of the United States of America, but many more damning things than that. Many more damning things than that, including, but not excluding many others, the existence of a big guy, Mr. 10%, who had to get his beak into 10% of everything that was being earned where in Ukraine. The corrupt business enterprise of Hunter Biden in Ukraine had a Mr. Big. That Mr. Big may or may not have been Joe Biden, though it's difficult to see who else it could have been, because it transpires that Hunter Biden's business partner in Ukraine made dozens of visits to the vice president's office in the White House when Joe Biden was vice president and with plenipotentiary powers in the Ukraine. So if Joe Biden were to be revealed in this laptop story to have been on the take in Ukraine, to have been Mr. Big, the big guy in the Ukraine, if he were to have been revealed to have been corruptly, secretly, undeclared, receiving vast subventions of money from an Eastern European country, wouldn't that put a different coat of paint on subsequent events between the United States and Ukraine? But that never had the chance to happen. Mueller was very honest. He told the committee that he had received the orders from Blinken and he had carried them out to the best of his ability because, and I quote him, "I wanted Vice President Biden to win the election." This is the acting Director General of the Central Intelligence Agency, engaging in a criminal conspiracy because he wanted Vice President Biden to win the presidential election. Thus, this week, it can be safely concluded that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Maybe, brackets, maybe, not in the way that Donald Trump alleged, but that it was stolen is now clear beyond any reasonable contradiction. It was stolen by interference in the American electoral process, not by Russian intelligence, but by American intelligence. We'll be talking to the one and only Chris Hedges about that and much more. Get your seatbelts on. Told you it was going to be a bumpy ride. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Glory, glory, Man United. If you know, you know. Here are the phone numbers to comment on what I said or didn't say, or on what my guests say or don't say. If you're in the United Kingdom or Ireland, the number is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. Remember, it is entirely free of charge. Ditto in the United States, in Canada, toll free. +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the possibly mythical rest of the world, the number is 44203 966 2625. That's 44203 966 2625. Now we've got a poll running. My goodness. I've never seen a more one-sided poll, but you might still want to vote. 13,000 people have voted already, and the show has only just begun. Is the CIA a force for good or evil? On Twitter, where 1,536 people have so far voted, 6% say it's a force for good, but that's as good as it gets for the CIA. 94% a force for evil. On YouTube, where 1,103 people have voted so far, 4% say it's a force for good, 96% say it's a force for evil. On Telegram, always the most perspicacious of our pollsters, it is 1% good, 99% evil. And on the YouTube community poll, where 9,700 people have so far voted, it is 3% good, 97% evil. Now, if it was a fair and just playing field, we'd have 2 Pulitzer Prize winners on the show tonight. As it was so far, we've only got 1, that's Chris Hedges. But my first guest would definitely win it. To call him an investigative reporter is like calling Ronaldo a footballer. He is the best investigative reporter, certainly working within the British Isles at this point in our rather shrunken history, to be fair. He is Kit Klarenberg of the crack outfit, Grey Zone News. And without him and without them, we would be so much worse off in terms of knowledge. Kit broke the story about the possible CIA engagement of 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. I'm glad to say he joins us now. Kit, welcome to the show. For those that haven't yet read your piece, and that will be most people because the story has been suppressed basically by the so-called mainstream media, summarize what you found, please.
Sure. So this is based on a court filing which was released by the Office of Military Commissions, which is overseeing the trials of 9/11 defendants like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind But yes, in effect, it vindicates and confirms and expands upon long held suspicions about the CIA's relationship with two hijackers, at least two hijackers, Al Hazmi and Al Midar. They entered the US on multi-entry US visas, which they probably shouldn't have gotten in the first place. They were under heavy surveillance by the CIA, well, an elite unit within the CIA known as Alex Station. Which was set up in 1996 specifically to track Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. And it was a joint effort between the CIA and the FBI, although the FBI were prohibited from sharing information gleaned by the unit without authorization. So they enter the US, which shouldn't have happened. The FBI representatives within Alex Station demanded to tell the Bureau that they were there, and they were overruled and told it wasn't their jurisdiction. Immediately upon arrival within the US, they made contact with this rather shadowy, mysterious figure called Omar al-Bayoumi, who appears to have been a Saudi intelligence agent, and he very quickly helped Midar and Hazmi get an apartment, and he gave them thousands of dollars, and seems to have had multiple contacts with them in the months leading up to 9/11. The most curious, striking aspect of the filing is the detail on the extraordinary level of protection provided to these two men by Alex Station. The FBI was repeatedly rebuffed in its attempts to tell headquarters about this, rather disturbing development. But not only that, they sought to misdirect the Bureau and gave them misleading information, refused to answer basic questions. It raises the very obvious question of whether these two hijackers, if not others, were working for the CIA in effect on the day of 9/11 itself.
Now, these two individuals had attended the summit of Al-Qaeda in Kuala Lumpur, a summit which had been copiously photographed by the CIA. Everyone who attended it, in fact, it was even recorded. I don't know if it was the audio that didn't work or the visual that didn't work. One of them didn't work, but they had audio or visual of everyone who attended it. And yet, they were still allowed to make use of the visas that they got in extraordinary circumstances and fly to California. What would be an innocent explanation of that?
There is none, whatsoever. I mean, I think it's worth underlining the context here. Throughout 1999, that the national security officials within the US were extremely worried about large-scale terror attacks in the US because they felt it would be extremely easy to do. They used the phrase that all the lights were blinking red, and these fears came to pass with the Millennium Plot in California itself. I mean, what could be a greater reason for preventing potential terror suspects from entering the US than a large-scale plot being foiled mere weeks before these two arrived. It must be said that suspicions about Hazmi and Midar's relationship with the CIA are long-standing. They have been voiced by, of all people, Richard Clarke, who was a White House national security advisor under Bill Clinton, who was summarily and almost immediately demoted upon the Bush administration taking office in January 2001. He records how he continued to have high-level meetings with CIA officials throughout 2001, and the issue of these two hijackers never ever came up. Al-Qaeda was discussed at these meetings, but no, he was never ever told. If at any point, I mean, there was no attempt made by the hijackers at any point to cover their tracks. I mean, some of their neighbors recall how they got no furniture and they sat on mattresses all day playing Flight Simulator, and at night sometimes they would be picked up by limousines. And at one point they were living with an FBI informant. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. It's the stuff of a movie, really. And so, yeah, there is no innocent explanation. I mean, at best you could say, well, in order to gather intelligence on Al Qaeda, they were allowing these people to move around and act with impunity. But then why would you not tell the FBI? That doesn't make any sense. Moreover, why would you actively misdirect the FBI? There was something deeper and darker there. I'm absolutely sure of it.
You say it would be the stuff of a movie. In a way, it was The Looming Tower, which I found profoundly impressive, powerful. Of course, tells some of this story, but without the knowledge that you have unearthed. But it kind of puts it down, although you're left to wonder, to a cock-up rather than a conspiracy. Could this all just have been about the rivalry, institutional rivalry, indeed hatred, between the FBI and the CIA, bureaucratic line drawing and so on, rather than an actual conspiracy by the CIA to allow these people to commit the crimes that they did?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, it's a well-worn movie trope, the evil CIA and the beneficent and crusading bureau. I mean, the FBI are of course scum, and in the wake of 9/11, were engaged in all sorts of absolutely horrific Islamophobic, racist profiling, setting innocent people up for terror attacks to validate the notion and the narrative that the US was under a massive terror threat in order to justify the war on terror abroad, which were long planned wars of imperial plunder. I mean, it does seem though that there were some genuinely independent, enterprising, and truth-seeking bureau operatives who were, trying to get to the bottom of this. There was one named in the filing, listed in the filing. They're given a pseudonym, who recalls how they found in an FBI computer system an electronic warning in this is in late August. I think it's August 23rd, warning that Hazmi and Midar were in the US. They immediately contacted the analyst who'd written it, who was an FBI analyst within Alex Station called Diana Corsi, and asked her for more information. She reportedly got extremely angry and demanded him to delete it because he wasn't allowed to see it. The very next day, he was told by FBI superiors to leave it alone and not go anywhere near it. Now, another pseudonymous bureau source within the court filing refers to how very, very quickly after 9/11, high-ranking FBI officials found out about the CIA's contact with Hazmi and Midar, and indeed the fact that the Bayoumi was a Saudi intelligence official, and they buried it, and they specifically instructed bureau operatives who were testifying to a joint inquiry into 9/11 to lie and conceal this information. And yes, this remained buried for over 2 decades subsequently. So yes, I think we can cast aside any delusions that the FBI at a high level was, an innocent party in all this.
Well, I asked you what an innocent explanation would be. What would a guilty explanation be? I suppose the converse or inverse of the point that you made was that the CIA wanted to keep track of these people, let them into the country, see who they were meeting, what they were up to, with a view to puncturing any plot that they had at a later date and rounding up a bigger fish. But they didn't do that. And these two men that were playing on a mattress with Flight Simulator all day and every day in their apartment went on to seize airplanes and fly them into the Twin Towers. I mean, who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, I mean, this is another remarkable aspect of 9/11 in general, is that, yes, there seems to have been a wide-ranging financial infrastructure supporting these hijackers' activities. No real evidence of it has emerged. it does seem that Saudi Arabia was funding ostensible Islamic cultural and religious centers, which were actually raising funds for terror attacks. But by and large, the hijackers paid for everything themselves, and they did so with credit cards in their own names. So, I mean, if anyone was watching their financial records, they would know that they'd booked the specific flights that were purportedly flown into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and they would have known that they were paying for flight lessons. I mean, again, what could be more suspicious than that? The idea that the CIA wouldn't have had at least some sense, with such a close eye being kept on the activities of Mihdhar and Hazmi, and indeed Bayoumy's funding and support of them being done at the CIA's direct behest, which is one of the most explosive disclosures from the filing. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, ultimately, the American power structure had an enormous amount to gain from 9/11. I mean, throughout the 90s, various neocon figures such as Zbigniew Brzezinski and the people involved with Project for a New American Century, the kind of neocon Shark Tank. They use this phrase over and over again, that in order to extend American power and to upgrade American defenses, it was necessary for a new Pearl Harbor to occur. And they got one on 9/11, and then some. I mean, everything they've been planning for and wanting, i.e. a massive expansion of the security and surveillance state at home, and a justification for long-planned invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, was handed to them on a platter. And I think that one of the most remarkable kind of post 9/11 aspects of this is that various people attached to Alex Station ended up heavily involved in the war on terror. One individual in particular became intimately involved in running the CIA's torture program. It's increasingly clear that the purpose of this program was to get false testimony out of terror suspects, again to justify the war on terror. The CIA, quote unquote, intelligence that Iraq was linked to 9/11 came from a torture victim, and they knew very, very well that he'd given them false information, but they passed it on anyway to justify the policy. Now, if you are a member of Alex Station at any level, let alone at the higher reaches, where the people involved in the torture program were, you are a prime suspect in 9/11 by definition. But then you would go on to be the chief interrogator of the purported suspects. I mean, it gives a whole new meaning to that well-worn idiom of a fox guarding a chicken coop. They could effectively force these people to say anything, and the public's entire understanding of 9/11, the logistics, the planning, the people involved, comes from torture, and therefore can probably be discounted. What actually happened, we don't know, and may never do.
Well, that's certainly the darkest interpretation, but all of the evidence is leading in that direction. That some, at least in the national security state in the United States, wanted some kind of Pearl Harbor incident. Now, when people used to come on my show and make that point, I used to brush it away, because it seemed to me that if the United States, at any level, was guilty of involvement in an attack on its own people in the Twin Towers, that it would bring about the destruction of the whole political system in the US, in governance, in the two parties in the Congress. I used to think it simply incredible, literally incredible, that the US could have been involved in this attack on 9/11. But the more that we discover from efforts such as yours, it begins to be inescapable that at least some in the security state actually wanted something like this to happen.
Indeed. And I mean, you've got to bear in mind that one of the most striking aspects of 9/11 that's never ever talked about is actually how staggeringly low the death toll was. I mean, it's the largest death of US citizens since the Civil War. And, I mean, it was a tragedy, of course. But, I mean, the World Trade Center was effectively a vertical city. It had hotels in it with hundreds and hundreds of rooms. It had restaurants, all sorts of tourist areas. It housed about 100,000 workers from, all sorts of major, finance and tech firms. It attracted well over 100,000 tourists every single day. And it was thought for at least a year, if not longer, after the attacks, that the deaths had been in the tens of thousands. Actually, it was just over 3,000. Okay, so one of the reasons for that was the plane struck very high, and they struck before most people had gotten to work at 8:45. I.e., 9 a.m. would be when people start arriving to their offices and when tourists start arriving. So a few floors lower and a few hours later, you have tens of thousands of people who aren't getting out. In the Pentagon, 20,000 people were in the building. The death count was 189. Mostly low-level staff and cleaners and builders, because it struck a portion of the building that was under refurbishment and effectively abandoned. And not a single senior Pentagon official was even vaguely injured by this. And I mean, we saw from Pearl Harbor, the direct the direct impact of an attack on the US is a huge level of support for the government and a huge level of support for foreign adventurism. It's often forgotten how rigidly and viscerally opposed to involvement in World War II the US public was. I think some polls in 1940, after the fall of France, put opposition to US entry at over 90%. This was seen as a tussle in a faraway land about which we know nothing. And so it was quite reasonable to expect that in the wake of 9/11, particularly with the maximum visual impact of the two towers, which was such a symbol of the US and New York, it was reasonable to assume that there would be a huge amount of public support for a response of some kind. I mean, yes, within mere hours, major news networks were, declaring that this was the work of Osama bin Laden, who had been steadily, particularly since the USS Cole bombing in 1998, built up as this Bond villain supremo who posed a mortal threat to the US. And then, 9/11 was this playing out in real time, and it did play out over and over and over again. I remember it very well in the UK. That was blanket coverage of the smoking towers collapsing for quite some time afterwards. It was a very, very, very effective tool of influence.
Finally, has this got any coverage in the United States in the mainstream media?
No, it hasn't. I mean, the response on social media has been absolutely extraordinary, and I have personally fielded dozens of interview requests for this. So, I mean, it's somewhat a testament to the waning power of the mainstream media. They can no longer suppress this stuff. I mean, the last year, a large number of documents related to the FBI's investigation of 9/11, which contained all sorts of bombshell information about Saudi involvement, and the hijackers' contact with Saudi intelligence agents were declassified. This is in the public domain. It was completely ignored. It's the work of independent researchers, independent citizen journalists, and average angry citizens to get this stuff out there, and ask questions and pressure people in power to provide them.
Well, you may not get a Pulitzer Prize, but you've definitely got the Mother of All Talk Shows Prize for investigative
journalism. Thank you very much.
Klarenberg, thank you very much for joining us.
God bless you, George.
The Mother
Thank you.
of All Talk Shows. Thank you so much. Is the CIA a force for good or evil? You can vote now on my Twitter, on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, and if you are, please give generously on the super chat, and on my Telegram channel, which is t.me/George Galloway, and on the YouTube community channel, where 10,000 people have already voted, and it doesn't look good for the CIA, gotta tell you. I'll be right back.
the airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Couple of messages on my Patreon. James Butler: Kennedy will be both mocked and snubbed by media and the deep state alike. Trump, like him or not, is a much more formidable force. Neither men trusted Fauci or the CIA. Kennedy talks good, but if by a miracle he did get in, he would soon find, like Trump, many walls and obstacles put in front of him in doing the right and rational thing. And Graham Briggs White says, well, that's 100% for now. NATO is a dead duck, as no one has mentioned the hypersonic missile that took out 200 to 300 high-ranking NATO officials that weren't supposed to be there in a bunker in western Ukraine. And James Lenahan says, greetings from the US, the home of the $55,000 life-saving abortion in a so-called blue state. I don't know how long I can take living in this. But as the late Sam Cooke said, where there's light, there's hope. Now, let me give you the phone numbers again. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, which let's face it is most of you, is 44203 966 2625. The poll's going great, Grunts. Almost 15,000 people have voted now, but it ain't getting any better for the CIA. I hope they're watching. As if they wouldn't be. Here's some super chats. Pat Daly, a very generous friend of the show. Pat, I hope I meet you one day, sends another 50 euros. Thanks, Pat. Rob Lee in the US sends $5. Greetings from the township of Pink, Oklahoma. Your message goes far and wide. How lovely is that? Thank you. Galway Video News sends 10 euros. Your voice is a clarion call to good people everywhere. Thank you. Michael Sherry sends £5 CIA is great for doing the dirty work of the wealthy elite. Justice will be done here or in the next world, but I hope that it's going to be here. Amen, Michael. Nasri Akil, a great supporter of the show, sends 20 Canadian dollars. The proliferation of GG Moats around the free world has changed the media war. Let me tell you something. The last 3 shows, and I'm including Wednesdays, which will climb still further, have reached almost 2 million people. 2 million people. It's incredible. 963,000 people watched Sunday and Wednesday. The numbers are phenomenal, and they grow and grow. Clips keep popping up that the last time we counted them had a fifth or less of the views that they now have. We definitely have been game changers. Rosanna Rapalavicius sends $10. Rosanna, my apologies for my pronunciation. She says, thank you for what you do and have done in the past. Thanks, Rosanna. Doc Jazz Another generous friend of the show sends another 50 UAE dirhams. Great monologue again, George. The official 9/11 story has always had the same level of credibility to me as the Nord Stream story of the Andromeda yacht. Great that you featured this topic. And Ange, 2099 cents, £5. Let's go, GG. Spotlight on the rats that are running things into the ground. Let's go to the lines to New York. Where else? To our old friend Melvin. Melvin, welcome back.
Hello, George. You hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Go ahead.
Nice to speak to you again. I was listening to your original thing, and I was listening to what the guy was talking about. And the one thing I thought is quite interesting is I remember back when Kennedy was around, there was a thing called Operation Northwoods. Now, Operation Northwoods, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, was a plan by the CIA, if I remember correctly, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to literally kill thousands of Americans in Florida to try to get something similar to the Bay of Pigs that you were talking about going again, to kind of push the president into that. And he basically told them no, and as we all well know, shortly after, they took him out, at least in my opinion as well. Yeah. I was thinking about this, and all the stuff that's come up recently with 9/11, and you know how I feel about that one. So I've kind of noticed like a similarity if you kind of like look at Operation Northwoods and the things that are coming out now with the CIA's possible involvement into it. And it was something I just wanted to iterate on that one.
Well, look, I've never had any doubt whatsoever that the deep state of the United States was capable of such a great act of evil as blowing up its own citizens in the heart of New York City. But the wisdom of doing so, the risks of being exposed, the collateral damage to the political system, the whole polity of the United States, I believed, was so vastly greater than any possible advantage that could be accrued by such a mass act of terrorism as that. I always doubted not whether they were bad enough to do it, but whether they were stupid enough to do it. And you suppose you could say if they did do it, they've gotten away with it up until now. But more and more, the case for a new 9/11 commission, a proper 9/11 commission this time, surely becomes unanswerable. And if Donald Trump, who's in a bit of trouble in New York City, had any sense, he would promise just that. He would say what happened on 9/11 is deeper, more profound than up until now we have realized. And I'm going to reopen the 9/11 commission and investigation. And while I'm at it, I'll open again the investigation into the murder of Robert Kennedy, into the assassination of President Kennedy, into the murder of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. There you go. That would sweep up a lot of votes, Melvin. Just saying. Thanks a lot for the call. Good to hear from you again. Josh is in London, wants to talk about Russia. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, hi, George. Happy St. George's Day, by the way.
Thank you. My day, my day.
Indeed. Yeah, sorry. Well, actually, George, I was given a choice of two topics, either Russia and, you know, the role the Lend-Lease played. Is it debating the role that Lend-Lease played in, like, Russia's victory against Nazi Germany? Or there was the alleged Chinese mistreatment of the Falun Gong. Which one would you prefer, George? I know we haven't got too much time.
Well, does anybody still fly flags for the Falun Gong? Go on to the other one.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, basically, George, you know, with the conflict in Ukraine, you know, protracting for as long as it has, a lot of people are trying to now denigrate and impugn Russia's decisiveness in the Second World War, even though Axis casualties can be somewhere between 80 and 90% of Axis casualties can be attributed to the Red Army, directly to the Red Army. Some of them are a lot of Russophobes are trying to allege that Russia, the Soviet Union would have lost that war were it not for the Lend-Lease across the Arctic and the Bering Strait. I don't know what you think of that, George. I think it's
I've not heard that one.
I've
not heard that one, Josh. Probably because I have already blocked all of the idiots that would shoot that kind of breeze. The people and armed forces of the USSR gave 26 million lives. The people of China, by the way, gave 20 million lives. Russia, the Soviet Union, China gave the vast majority of casualties, martyrs in that conflict. The Lend-Lease was little and late, no doubt welcome, but little and late. The victory of the Red Army was predicated on the very same thing that is guaranteeing their victory in this conflict against NATO in Ukraine, namely their ability in their publicly controlled military-industrial complex to outperform all of the other private military-industrial complexes elsewhere in the world. They can produce more of everything. And unlike in the past, where quantity became a quality in itself, the Russian MIC is producing weapons of the highest grade in quality and quantity. And that's why you can safely say that these fools who wish to rewrite history of the Second World War or cast aspersions about the Russian military performance in this conflict. Let's just be clear. If Russia had behaved as Britain and the United States behaved towards Iraq in the first weeks and months of the war, nothing would still be standing in Kiev, and nobody would be walking around on presidential, prime ministerial tours for the cameras. No U2, no rock stars, no film stars, nobody would be visiting Kiev. It would not still be standing. But Russia did not want to do that, unlike us in Iraq. It did not want to do that for a very significant number of reasons, not the least of which is that from Russia's point of view, they are not at war with the Ukrainian people. They are at war with the regime that illegitimately seized power in 2014 and has prosecuted a civil war against a substantial minority of its own people in the 8 coming up for 9 years since. That's the main reason why Russia did not attack Ukraine in the way that we attacked Iraq. Because we did not care a toss how many Iraqis we killed. For us, they were just Arabs. For us, they were just Muslims. And Arab and Muslim blood was as cheap as blood can get. But in Ukraine, Russia has not taken that view. They have now taken much of the territory that they intend to take. There's still some more, I think, along the coast, and principally the city of Odessa, an iconic Russian city, still under Ukrainian rule, but they are not far off the major war aim of liberating the Russian-speaking people from the tyranny, they would say, and the people would say, of the Western Ukrainian regime based in Kiev. All that remains for them to ensure is that the rump of Ukraine does not become a NATO-infested armed camp with bristling with NATO weapons, including nuclear weapons. That is unconscionable. And therefore, a regime change in Kiev will have to occur, and in my view is even now beginning to occur. You may or may not have seen the footage of the thousands of mothers and wives of the soldiers at the front massing in protests and demonstrations all over Kiev over the last couple of days. You may or may not have seen the real difficulty of press ganging people to send them to the front that is going on. Huge numbers of press gangers have to go and increasingly violently cart off anyone that they can find between the ages of 16 and 60 and take them to the front line, where increasingly, obviously, they are not prepared to fight. They disobey their officers. Sometimes they kill their officers. They complain that they are undertrained, underarmed, poorly armored, and indeed all of these things are true. So, as Colonel General McGregor said, I saw it earlier this evening, this is a catastrophe for the people of Ukraine. That in this proxy war, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has now described it, the sacrificial lambs have been the people, the territory, the infrastructure of Ukraine. It is a terrible crime, especially if it was merely a warm-up for the fight just to come in the Taiwan Straits. Thanks, Josh, for that. Coming up after the break, an actual Pulitzer Prize winner, the one and only Chris Hedges. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Hello, America. It is me, Joe Biden. I think I'm not reading a teleprompter. I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Myself.
The giant Labour Party sailing clearance is now on. Hurry now, as we've got zero interest in our party. It's literally the lowest it's ever been. Give up on the common man and save today. That's right, we're getting rid of all of the Corbynites. Literally every single one. Being a Blairite has never been more in style. Only available at what should be the UK's biggest political party. The new Labour Party. We're doing this again.
Time, weather, and... Let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
Christopher Kruger says the National Security Act of 1947, which formed the CIA and the NSA, was ill-conceived and probably unconstitutional. Note that the United States has not declared war since 1943, but instead launches unconstitutional, illegal wars of aggression for Wall Street and US hegemony. And Andy says the CIA's involvement in the overthrow of governments in Latin America, the lies which saw the Iraq War based on the assassination of JFK bringing about absolute death and destruction in Vietnam, and the probability that some of the 9/11 hijackers were being paid by the CIA/Saudi organization of absolute psychopaths. Paul MacDonald says, as the now skinny Mike Pompeo said, the CIA lies. And big thanks to new legends on my Patreon. That's Teresa Kelly, my old friend, Jimbo Eldor Jr., David Nimmo, and Francis Lucero. And Blaine Dillman, a new Moats graduate who says, please keep up the struggle and stay gold. One man who is solid gold is my next guest. If Foggy Bottom wasn't so muddy, Chris Hedges would be in there as the Secretary of State. As it is, he has to make do with the mother of all talk shows, and I'm very glad that he joins us now. You could say, Chris, that this is a kind of CIA special this evening. Let's deal with morals, whistleblowing, before the committee first. On many levels, it was quite extraordinary testimony. He openly stated that he had done what he had done for the obvious reason that he wanted Vice President Biden to win. In other words, he wanted to defeat the incumbent president. But more importantly, that the man who told him to do what he then did was none less than Antony Blinken, the usurper, who's in your chair at State right now. What did you make of it?
Yes, it was a fascinating moment that we caught three different moments in that testimony where we're talking about the letter signed by 50 intelligence or former intelligence officials claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian, had all the hallmarks, I think was the word, of Russian propaganda. But it just shows, I think, was just a brief glimpse of how the establishment organs, including the CIA, worked along with Silicon Valley and most of the press to ensure that Biden was elected over Trump. I'm not a Trump supporter. Indeed, I'm quite critical of Trump. However, he challenged the monolithic power of that deep state, and it has brought back into power people like Blinken, Sullivan, the National Security Agency, and etc., all of Victoria Nuland, who serves Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. So they're back in control, and this was just a brief window into how they operate below the surface, where most of us, of course, can't see.
Well, of course, the press has the right to be biased, has the right to want one candidate to win rather than another. But this was a conspiracy, wasn't it? Because these people knew that the laptop was not Russian disinformation. They knew, because the FBI had had it for an entire year, that what was in it was true.
Well, and they also knew that Trump wasn't a Russian agent. It's lie upon lie upon lie, which began almost immediately when Trump was elected. And this was just one more example of how the public was being spun. With the idea that Russian bots or, Russian agents were somehow distorting our political system. And this is a way to avoid dealing with the grotesque social inequality and suffering that's been visited on the country by deindustrialization, furthered by both parties, the permanent war, furthered by both parties, and it just is a kind of classic deflection away from where the real malaise lies, and that malaise is the kind of seizing up of our democracy, the seizure of control of all of the institutions, including the press, of course, that should work in a functioning democracy, and making them completely subservient to the billionaire class and corporate power. And that's true with both parties.
But the CIA, I mentioned in my introduction my early 18-year-old meeting with Philip Agee, the runaway CIA agent, whistleblower we'd now call him, who persuaded me, if I needed persuading, that this was an agency out of control, who probably murdered the Republic itself on the 22nd of November 1963 in the murder most foul, and went on to commit a whole series of murders, assassinations, coups d'etats, ballot rigging around the world, and so on. Surely someone is capable, or at least willing, to try and bring this hydra-headed monster under control. This is St. George's Day. St. George slew the dragons. Who will slay the dragon of the CIA?
Well, they're unaccountable and uncontrollable. The CIA always functioned as both an intelligence gathering arm and a clandestine paramilitary force. It's now primarily a clandestine paramilitary force that engages in torture and black ops and runs black sites around the globe. And people within the centers of power that attempt to confront them are dealt with very ruthlessly. If you go back and remember, Feinstein tried to do the report on torture, and even she came out quite ashen in that final press conference because all of her computers were hacked. They denied the information. They carried out all sorts of threats. So to take on this institution I don't have a theory on who killed JFK, but there are some very serious questions, including, of course, putting Allen Dulles, who was a psychopath and hated Kennedy, on the Warren Commission. I mean, I think there's certainly it's a legitimate question as to whether the CIA was involved in the murder of Kennedy. And not just Kennedy, but all sorts of CIA officials throughout the years who attempted to speak out, including carrying out experiments on other CIA officials, giving them hallucinogenic drugs, running all sorts of black ops, going back to the 50s. Steve Kinzer wrote a very good book about this called Poisoner in Chief, carrying out mind control experiments at McGill universities where people were reduced to kind of babbling idiots in fetal positions. I mean, the whole kind of sophistication or professionalization, the engineering of torture, all of this came out of the CIA. These are all tools that they use. So it is part of the kind of corporate coup d'etat because, of course, the military-industrial complex, I would say, owns the CIA, which Bobby Kennedy Jr. in his announcement for his presidential run quite correctly pointed out.
We'll come to him in a minute. What did you think of the Grey Zone's breaking news about further evidence, let's say further evidence, perhaps not yet conclusive, that the CIA was running at least two of the hijackers on 9/11 that brought devastation, not just to New York City, but to, in the end, the whole world?
Well, these are the hijackers there were these hijackers out in California that were clearly being supported. They were getting Saudi money. They were clearly getting Saudi protection, Saudi help. To what extent was the Saudi intelligence service working with the American intelligence service? They have a very close relationship, like the Israelis. These are all legitimate questions because there was very, very heavy Saudi involvement, without question. And not just in terms of the fact that I think it was 11 of the 19 were Saudis, but that they were funded, supported, and protected by the Saudis. I covered Al-Qaeda. I covered after 9/11. I covered all of the hijackers, everything they did. That is a fact. Where it goes beyond that, I don't know. But those questions, again, deserve to be raised and answered.
Let's turn to Bobby Kennedy. Call me sentimental, call me a Catholic, but I have a very soft spot for the Kennedy families, particularly those that were slain. And so I'm hoping against hope that, first of all, Robert Kennedy Jr. survives this campaign, but secondly, that he wins it. What are his chances? How has he started, in your view?
Well, I listened to his announcement, which I thought was good, but then go back and read the press reports of the announcement, including in the New York Times. It was a savage kind of attack on character assassination of Kennedy, what they do is focus on the vaccine issue to attempt to paint him as a nut. I mean, the whole New York Times article, that's all they talked about. He talked about many other things, the environment, permanent war, the corporate seizure of government power. These were all in his, and those were all ignored. So one, you'll have the press working day and night to the mainstream press, the establishment press, legacy press, to destroy him. That they've already begun. He's also has constrained, I think, by running as a Democrat. He has to sign a loyalty oath, as Bernie Sanders did to the Democratic Party. So what happens if once again the Democratic National Committee, as they did with Sanders, rig the primaries to put Biden in power? Biden isn't going to do it, and have announced, by the way, the Biden administration and the Democratic Party said they will do no debates. And the Democratic National Committee has already come out and endorsed Biden. So he's going to have the Democratic Party establishment against him. The press is going to paint him as a kind of kook, a figure of ridicule. Dennis Kucinich announced his. Dennis is a good friend of mine. I like Dennis very much and admire him. But they did the same thing to Dennis, and so it's going to be a real battle. And the question is, if he's not the nominee, does he then do what Sanders did, which is essentially tell those people who supported him that they should vote for Biden? I hope we don't go down that black hole again. What's that great line from Samuel Johnson, the triumph of hope over experience? We've seen twice now in the Sanders campaign how vicious and underhanded the Democratic National Committee is. And remember, Biden is a very weak candidate. He's polling neck and neck. In some polls, Trump is ahead. He clearly has cognitive issues. The things he reads off his teleprompter, he just keeps reading, turn right, turn left, this kind of stuff. He's clearly not all there. And so they know they have an extremely weak candidate that they're going to put forward. And so I think the tactics will be, brutal and ruthless, perhaps even more ruthless than when Sanders was running. And if Bobby gets any traction, all of those forces are going to conspire against him.
It's not either or, though, is it? You can run for the Democratic nomination and then announce a third-party candidature.
If you violate the loyalty oath. Remember, Trump refused to take the loyalty oath, which is probably what Kennedy should do. And maybe he will do that, but that would be the right tactic. But once you take that loyalty oath, you kind of are beholden. Yes, that's right. He could not take the loyalty oath and run a third-party campaign. Remember, how much infrastructure he has, how much money he has. He's never run for political office before. I've worked with third-party campaigns going all the way back to Nader. I was Nader's speechwriter, and have not voted for a Democrat since 2000. But I've seen how effective they are in marginalizing, discrediting, and silencing third parties. Howie Hawkins, who's a great labor organizer, was completely blanked out. He got less, he got less focus or less attention than Jill Stein. I mean, Jill Stein largely got attention because they were demonized her, like they did as they demonized Nader. Yeah. So he's running into a buzzsaw. He's obviously very intelligent. He probably knows what he's running into, but it isn't going to be pretty because I think there's a clear recognition within the Democratic Party that Biden is very, very vulnerable and could lose. I mean, most people don't want a replay of Trump or Biden, but that's from at least 18 months out or something. That appears to be what we're going to get.
So that presupposes that no one else. What about if Kennedy's candidature proves to be a stalking horse for someone else to enter the race? Because there cannot be a Democrat alive outside of the White House bedroom who thinks that Joe Biden can survive another bruising election campaign, avoiding everyone, avoiding debate, and then serving 4 years. I mean, at the end of 4 years, how much will he drool at the end of another 4-year term? Mightn't there be a third candidate?
I mean, the Democratic Party will work very hard to make sure there isn't, certainly among the establishment ranks, they won't see a third party candidate. They'll crush it. This is what, of course, Obama's role was essentially to shut out all the other candidates to make sure that Biden, who at the initial, remember when Biden began the campaign, he had no traction at all. So they will intervene to pressure and push out candidates, certainly within the Democratic Party, that might challenge. I don't think we're going to see a lot of challenges because they can't afford it. And I expect that they are going to be quite rough with Kennedy. It's going to be very, very nasty, and the press is going to play its part once again. And they're going to seize on tangential issues to essentially shut out his main message, which is correct, and that is that we've undergone a kind of corporate coup d'etat in slow motion. And that fusion of government and state power is now absolute. I mean, that really is his main campaign message, in which he seeks to break apart. But that message is going to have a very hard time getting out.
I take all of those points, of course, especially coming from you, but that's what they tried to do with Donald Trump, and it didn't stop him winning.
Yeah, but Trump played to a different constituency. That's the difference. So you have the Democratic liberal elites, educated, liberal, urban elites that essentially control the Democratic Party. And so what they are driven, of course, by fear of any disruption of this system. So they are going to get solidly behind Biden. This isn't an ideological battle. It's a battle where they are going to cling in every way they can to the privilege and power and position they have, both economic and political. That's the difference. Whereas Trump was appealing to the disenfranchised, legitimately disenfranchised, those through deindustrialization and the slashing of austerity, or slashing of social programs, austerity, destruction of welfare, when 70% of the original recipients on welfare, this was done by Clinton, by the way, were children. So it's a different constituency, and Trump gives expression to that, I would call it legitimate rage on the part of the disenfranchised. That is not the power center of the Democratic Party.
Trump will be hoping that Kennedy runs as a third-party candidate, won't he? Because at the very least, he's going to take some votes, maybe a lot of votes, from Joe Biden.
Yeah, that would be, I think if he runs as a third-party candidate, he's obviously a far more attractive candidate than Joe Biden, and splitting that vote, which is already, it's already virtually even, would be devastating to the Biden campaign, which is why, of course, they will be so virulent about trying to bring down Kennedy as quickly as they can.
Chris Hedges, as always, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Is the CIA a force for good or evil? 16,000 people have voted now. You've still got half an hour or more to vote. Good 6%, evil 94%. On YouTube, good 4%, evil 96%. On Telegram, still good 1%, evil 99%. I don't know if we've ever had a result like that. And on the YouTube community poll, where 11,000 of you have voted, it's good 3%, evil 97%. I'll be right back.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've
go
got a
ahead.
book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here. I'd just like to read it, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off, get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Okay, your calls now all the way to the end. Loads of super chats coming in. Thank you very much all for donating. Aaron Rai sends 449 rupees, which is £4.40. Aaron, thank you indeed. Mal99 IFY gives £9.99. You have my utmost respect, Mr. and Mrs. Galloway. Thank you both for everything that you do. Thank you. Joe Tugas sends $10 in honor of my dear little sister Beth, who passed away this past Orthodox Easter. May God rest her soul, Joe. Sorry to hear that. Matlas X sends $10. Sudan needs some freedom and democracy spread to them by the United States, just like Iraq, Libya, and Syria. It's coming, I think. And Sailing Prepper Dark Secrets sends $5. Don't forget Operation Northwoods, indeed. That's already come up tonight. Mr. Lover, another great supporter of the show, sends £2, then another £2. Again, £4 in total. Thank you, sir. Mehdi sends $10. The only oath a candidate should be taking is the oath to the Constitution of the United States. A candidate is supposed to serve we, the people. And Janice Anderson sends $5. Most states have sore loser laws preventing candidates who lose a party primary to run Indy. Has not been used at presidential level, but would be. Let's go at the lines then to Michigan, where Andrew wants to talk about Donald Trump. Andrew, welcome.
Hi, George. This is Andrew Kingman.
Nice to hear you. Go ahead, sir.
What's that?
Yeah, go on. You're on the air.
George, I'm
Yes.
a full-blooded Indian from Michigan, was a lifelong Democrat,
Okay.
been a Catholic all my life, and we got that in common. But as
God
that
bless
lifelong Democrat, I could not vote for Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump got me curious. And why were all these mainstream Republicans against him? He beat 17 of them, to tell you the truth, and all the big money that supported them. So, by that, I voted for the last person I voted for in the Democratic Party was Barack Obama. Now I realize he was a Manchurian candidate. And as long as the media acts the way it does, any candidate the Democrats put out is that Manchurian candidate. So that's what I believe there. So that's why.
What do you think about Bobby Kennedy's
start
run?
he give cover to Hillary Clinton as working under her in the State Department. So that says it there too. He had access to
Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy. I'm talking about Bobby Kennedy Jr. He did not work for Hillary Clinton.
He didn't work in the State Department?
As far as I know, not.
Okay, well then I might be misinformed there. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, let's both of us study that. But I would have thought the last place in the world he would have worked would be for Hillary Clinton in the State Department. As far as I know, he's been a private sector lawyer working on environmental cases, fighting corporate corruption, all of his professional life, Andrew. I think you've got that one wrong. But thanks for the call. Very nice to hear from our friends in Michigan. I've spoken there many times. Have some good friends there. Mike is in Liverpool, where I've got even more good friends. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, George. How are you doing?
By the grace of God, good. What would you like to say, Mike?
Well, basically, I'm not much different in age than yourself. I've always loved Liverpool. It's my home. And I'll certainly fight for it. But what I won't fight for is any of this crowd that are in at the moment. I'm just
why aren't we spending? Why are we not spending our money on building infrastructure and improving conditions in places like Liverpool? Why are we sending our money to Kupiansk instead?
Exactly. Why? Why is it going everywhere else apart from their own people? This is what I can't understand.
It's the quality of government that we've got. It's the quality of opposition that we've got. It's the quality of mass media that we've got.
Mass media.
They made sure of that. They made sure of that. They destroyed the opposition.
Yeah, and all of the media that we've got is literally what I'm watching now is media that is not mass media, but it is mass media in the respects of our country and the people who actually believe in our country. And that is what we're going to find.
Well, I think that you've touched on an important point. I should correct myself in calling it mass media. Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV is not mass media. This show will exponentially defeat it in the ratings over the last 2 hours and for the rest of this week. That much I can say without even knowing what their current numbers are. Sky News, we have far more people watching this show in the course of a week than will watch the comparable politics program on Sky. Ditto virtually any show on politics in the entire British television media. And they have millions of pounds to spend, and indeed, in the case of the BBC, can send you to jail if you don't pay for them. So in an era when virtually nobody is buying newspapers and fewer people are watching so-called legacy media on the television, that means the informed people, or even just the curious people, are letting their fingers do the walking on their computer keyboards and finding people like us. And that's how thee and me came together, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Now let me show you the poll. CIA, a force for good or evil. It's not changing. 6 good, 4 good, 1 good, 3 good, 94 evil, 96 evil, 99 evil, 97 evil. The poll is almost closing, and 16,000 people have voted. If you want to record your point of view, get it in now. JV Manila sends 275 Philippine pesos. That's a very handsome donation. £35.58 that works out at. The CIA is a force for good, but only in the movies. I'm quite sure you won't find the likes of Jason Byrne in that lot in real life. All the best to you, Gayatri, and the family. Thank you. God bless. Roar Axdal sends 25 Norwegian crowns and virtually always does. Roar, I'm very grateful to you. Karim Al-Nashi, again, every week, £4.99. Thank you, Karim. Shannon Fontaine, £2. Daniela Modus Cutter, a good friend and patron of mine, £2.99. John Kelly, £5. Money for Moats and not the BBC. I want truth. Thanks, John. And Bob Jones sends $10. Bruce is up early in Adelaide in Australia. Better put him on. He wants to talk about Sudan. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, just briefly, George, how are you?
By the grace of God, good, thanks. Go ahead.
Oh, 2 or 3 days ago, about, I say 3 days at the most, Biden was on the phone to the leader of the rebel party in Sudan and offered whatever help he could. I noticed that today on the YouTube that the American personnel, defence personnel, have arrived in Sudan in relation to the disturbances over there. And I guess we'll see more of that disturbances in the Middle East as the US become or try to unsettle the whole situation, because they spend $320 million annually budget to sponsor disturbances around the world. I was just going back in relation to what happened in Australia 2 or 3 days ago. Our Reserve Bank of Australia was governed by an independent body, and that's all been cancelled now, and it's now the independent body will only meet the Reserve Bank.
Oh, we've lost Bruce in Adelaide. That's a great pity. Let's try and get him back and go on to Joseph in Corby in England, who wants to talk about Diane Abbott. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Diane and the whole situation, how the media is reacting to it. Do you get that?
Yes, well, for people who don't know what we're talking about, Diane Abbott is a former leader, shadow cabinet member in Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. She's a black woman. She entered Parliament at the same time as me. Was a friend of mine for a long time, no longer. And she's in hot water over a letter that she wrote in the Observer, which she has apologised for, but that has not stopped Keir Starmer suspending her, and I presume later to withdraw the whip from her, and that'll be her and Corbyn both out the door. That's what you're calling about, Joseph. What's your take on it?
That's like a follow-up question, because you know how whenever old Labour gets in trouble with new Labour, so to speak, it's always about like Jews or Israel or something related to it. And I was wondering like how...
Well,
how
my problem, Joseph, is I have not, because I'm not in England and you can't read letters in the Observer online, at least I've not been able to find it. The letter that she wrote raises a number of questions, all of which demonstrate her utter stupidity. The first is writing a letter to the Observer in the first place. Who reads the Observer and who reads letters in the Observer? And who's stupid enough, in the context of the last couple of years, the last 5 years, stupid enough to write a letter to the Observer which appears to minimize racism against Jews? Now, I haven't seen the letter, so I'm conscious that I may be doing her a disservice. But so far in what I've said, I'm not doing her a disservice. Jewish people have suffered anti-Semitism, racism, anti-Jewish racism, anti-Jewish hatred for millennia in Western countries, including in the United Kingdom. Until very recently, until the early 1960s. Anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, would have been more or less the most common form of racism in Britain. Now, quite obviously, with the arrival in Britain of large numbers of black people, of Asian people, of Muslim people, the Jews have slipped down the table of people who are victims of racism. But why would anyone want to make anything of that? That's what I can't understand. Not least because in the lifetime of people still alive, 6 million Jews were industrialized, annihilated, were genocided, were mass murdered. So why would you write a letter to the Observer which allows your enemies to come down hard upon you? And that's what she has done. Unless I've got the nature of her letter wrong, I'll leave her letter there, Joseph. But let me add an overarching point. Why is Jeremy Corbyn still in Keir Starmer's Labour Party? Why is Diane Abbott still in it? Why is anybody who is a socialist still in a party that is self-evidently seeking any and every opportunity to root out and extirpate anybody who was associated with the very brief socialist period of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party? What is this? Masochism? I mean, do you enjoy the pain? Do you enjoy the suffering? Why would you continue to ask people to vote to put Keir Starmer into Downing Street, which is looking less and less likely in my humble opinion? Why would you do that? Why didn't Jeremy Corbyn, when he was at the height of his powers and popularity, walk out of the Labour Party and bring perhaps 100, maybe 200,000 people with him? Why not? Is he waiting until there's nobody left to follow him, out and standing only as an individual? That's just stupid. And I'll go further, it's cowardly. It's cowardly. These people, these leaders, these MPs in the so-called socialist campaign group are cowards. They're not prepared to do, as I did, stand outside the Labour Party, fight the Labour Party in elections, and defeat the Labour Party in elections, as I did not once but twice, because they're not prepared. They'd rather keep their salary, which Diane herself once described as a good job, clean, no heavy lifting, decent wages, warm in the winter time. Diane, it's not too late, but it's getting there. Thanks, Joseph. Kevin Broom on the email tonight says, on air at moats.tv. George, if you substitute CIA for NATO, the poll would be pretty much the same. Thanks, Kevin. We may well do that. On the line from Germany is Ray on JFK. Go ahead, Ray.
Hello, George. I'd like to thank you for your show. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, very clearly. Go ahead.
Okay. This is the first time I ever called into a show, so my hands are shaking and I'm very nervous.
Okay.
I am a retired New York City fireman. I was at the Trade Center 10 minutes after the second tower went down, and I knew it was nonsense since day one. But that's not the reason for my call. The reason for my call is why we need a JFK, RFK, and Trump, either one of those guys, because then the Democrats can't cheat. No matter who they cheat for, the American people win. And I think they'd rather have Trump because they could manipulate Trump more. I like this guy, Rivek. I'm sure he has great ideas, but he has no idea what he's up against, where RFK does. and Donald Trump does. And no matter which one of those two win, then the other one needs to swallow his pride and run as Vice P. I think that would unite the Democrats and the Republicans, so now they can't play that game. And I think that's the only chance for America to survive, which in turn the world will survive. And that's the point I wanted to make.
Well, you made it very beautifully. If that's your first time, don't make it long before you make your second one, because you very powerfully and movingly intervened on a very important subject that we're debating tonight. I desire only the defeat of Joe Biden, only the defeat of the so-called Democrats, because like the Labour Party in England, like the so-called Social Democrats in Germany, where you're calling from, they are a bigger enemy to the working people than the parties supposedly to the right of them that they claim is the best reason for voting for them. The lesser of two evils never really appealed to me, and now I could not agree on who is the lesser of the two evils, Democrat or Republican, Labour or Conservative, SPD against FDP, and the alphabet soup of German politics. So I'm for defeating the worst candidate. And the worst candidate, without a shadow of a doubt, is Joe Biden. For reasons I don't have time to adumbrate tonight, but the most important one, he has brought us to the brink of World War III, and he must not be allowed to keep his increasingly shaky, sclerotic, Alzheimer fingers off the nuclear button. Now, given my politics, given my background, I would obviously prefer to see a Kennedy in the White House than a Trump. But if the three of them go into this election in 2024, I think Kennedy will get a very substantial vote from people who would not easily vote for Donald Trump. And Joe Biden would struggle to come second in that presidential campaign. So whatever way it breaks, Biden, for me, has to be defeated. And I think it would be with a sigh of relief that most Democrats would see him gone. Thanks, Ray. Great call. Matt is in Massachusetts. Wants to talk about Ukraine. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, the war in Ukraine is bad. The thing in Taiwan is bad. But if we lose our independent news people, such as yourself and others that you have mentioned and have had on the show, then we're not going to get any good information, and we'll lose everything. With this Redact Act goes through, along with the central bank money, then they can say, well, that's misinformation from England. We're going to block any money going to any of these people, and they can just shut it right off. So the freedom of speech and the freedom to tell the truth is, I think, the most important war that we have to win to be able to win the others.
I agree with that very much, Matt. It's the First Amendment for a reason. Without free speech, you don't have democracy. And if you don't have democracy, you don't have the claimed legitimacy that your state runs on. The United States would cease to be a democratic country if it destroyed freedom of speech, and in so doing destroyed the First Amendment of its own constitution. So we must fight that. But this is 2023, and soon it will be 2024. And we still have hope of changing things. And because it's 2023 and not 1993 or 2003, it is not possible to shut down the internet. We will find a way to bring the truth to people. And as long as God gives me breath, I'll continue to do it. And after me, I have, by the grace of God, 6 children and a young wife. And they'll continue to bring you the mother of all talk shows, even if I suffer some terrible fate. Thank you, Matt. God bless you. Heath is in Florida on 9/11. Go ahead, Heath.
Thank you, George. Great show as always. I've lived in America 20 years. I'm a citizen here now. And in 2001, I was living in Los Angeles when the attack happened. And at the time, I agreed with my wife, let's not go to the cinema anymore, because as a terrorist organization, I thought that cinemas and the Hollywood film industry was a really natural target because it was worth $6 billion a year. But over time, I started to get suspicious because nobody ever attacked the infrastructure of the Hollywood industry. And then a couple of years later, I started to do some of my own research. And it was into a company called the Ace Elevator Company. And what I found, there's a lot more sort of conspiratorial materials online now. But at the time I did it in 2004, 2005, I could not get much information except for the fact that after the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, where a bomb went off in the basement, they replaced the company that was servicing the elevators. And now it's generally well known that for several months prior to the collapse of the towers in 2001, there was extensive work going on, and the Ace Elevator Company had the contract. And what I found out was that I couldn't find anything else about that company, and it was quietly liquidated, I believe, somewhere around 2004, 2005. But I couldn't find any information on the company, the board of directors. But now if you start to research that company, you'll see that there are people that worked at the company who are suspicious of who was then brought in to work at the company towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s. So I actually think that could be, that's a canary in the coal mine as to how they would have brought down those towers from inside. Thanks.
Well, I've no idea about the Ace Elevator Company. I don't want to get into a Dominion Fox News type legal battle, so let me say, if Ace Elevators are still out there, they're welcome to call the show and rebut the implied criticism of their conduct, to say the least, in that call. But it's very interesting, Heath. I'm sure everyone is now Googling Ace Elevators. It just goes to show that the case for a new 9/11 commission is unanswerable. There are too many unanswered questions. Let's have a new and proper 9/11 commission. And Donald Trump should make that one of his campaigning pledges. And so should Bobby Kennedy Jr. The last few super chats now. Nobody sends $7.77. Man must change or die. There is no other course. The world teacher, aka the Christ, Maitreya, Buddha, Imam, Mahdi, Kalki, Avatar, Messiah, etc. And Nidjus sends £2. God bless, getting closer to the truth. Keep it up. And Mark Savage sends £5. I don't believe any of the alphabet agencies are a force for good. Love the show too. Thanks, Mark. Sancho Relaxo sends $2 Canadian. Mike Rupert's crossing the Rubicon. The 9/11 ref. And the amazing Blumpkin, what a great name, sends $5. Architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. Well, we have, in fact, had them on the show, not once, but twice. The one and only, he was magnificent the last time he called, Muzaffar from California, but who's actually from Mars. Go ahead, Muzaffar, what would you like to say?
Well, my first observation on Earth was in 1949, when I attended a school in the Middle East. The school had approximately a dozen students. 2 students named Israel and Palestine, both very good-looking kids, both having straight A grades, unfortunately never seemed to get along. One day during lunch break, things got out of hand. Israel grabbed Palestine's hot lunch plate and threw the plate on Palestine's face. Palestine, out of instinct, reflex action, retaliated by folding his napkin and tossing it towards Israel. Israel intercepted this with his sharp utensils. there was a commotion, and the principal, headmaster, whose name tag USA, and the morality department head with a name tag on the chest, Britain, came out and immediately, without investigating the matter, started to scold Palestine for unruly behavior and grounded him for 2 weeks and then threatened to expel him from the school. To add salt to Palestine's wound, they ordered a new lunch plate for Israel. While Israel, Britain, and the USA's behavior is unjust, inhumane, and should never be condoned, that the attitude of the other students in the Middle East school who saw the entire incident and never came to the aid of Palestine is equally repulsive. Thankfully, the Middle East students are finally waking up. Now, do you want to know how all this will end?
Yes, of course I do.
This fight is a boxing match between a heavyweight and a featherweight. There is no limit to the number of rounds the two boxers can fight. The boxer who tires first, and I emphasize, who tires first will lose. It is with sadness and tears that I predict the following. The Israelis will get tired of killing the Palestinians before the Palestinians get tired of being killed. That's it.
Well, very powerful and poetic and philosophical, Muzaffar. I'm not sure that you've got the final chapter exactly right, but one thing is for sure, that David defeated Goliath. No one can dispute that. I have myself been a partisan in the Palestinian cause since the middle of the 1970s. That's a very, very long time. I first visited the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon with the editor of this show, Ron Mackay. That's how long we have been friends, in 1977. And I made promises then that I would never leave the Palestinian people standing alone. And I have kept that promise. There have been promises I have broken, but not that one. And I will, until I have no more breath, continue to do so. And after me, as I said, I have, by the grace of God, many children. And more importantly than me having many children, when I began campaigning for the Palestinian people in the mid-1970s, there were few of us. You could have fitted us into a very small hall for the whole of Britain. But now the supporters of the Palestinians could fill Hyde Park, and have done. And across the world, the supporters have become many millions, many tens of millions. And the shift that's going on in the world, the tectonic shift that we talk about here on the show, cannot but advantage the Palestinian people, who have been cruelly left alone by the so-called paragons of civilization and freedom and liberty in what we call the West. I spoke last week at some length about the decline of the West and compared it to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I don't propose to repeat all that again. Let's just say that the evidence since I last spoke to you, that the degeneracy of the so-called West and our culture has continued apace, as any viewer of my social media account already knows. I finally have had the fake appellation Russian state media affiliate removed from my Twitter account. It was a fake, it was untrue, it was damaging, and therefore defamatory, and my legal action against Twitter continues. Although they did have very little in the way of defense, they now have none, now that they have removed it. So it would be best, Mr. Musk, that you seek mediation with my legal team, because if not, we will take this all the way to the end and we will discover who it was that persuaded the now discredited old management of Twitter to apply that false label upon me. But I'm grateful that since the removal of the label, the number of followers I have on Twitter has leapt by thousands in just a couple of days. In fact, it's going up about 100 per hour right at this moment, which is, of course, evidence that the false label came with a battery of suppressive tools, search bans, ghost bans, algorithmic suppression of all kinds, which kept my following lower than it would have been and kept the audience for my output far, far lower than it would have been. Now that the label has been removed, I can see that many, many people who haven't seen a message from me in a very long time are seeing them and responding to them. It's rare now that any tweet of mine gets less than 100,000 views, and some many hundreds of thousands of views. So thank you in part, Mr. Elon Musk, for a modicum of justice, but justice has not yet been done. And your people know the address of my solicitor, KRW Law, brackets, Human Rights, of Belfast, Ireland. It's been marvellous for me. Let me end by thanking the new Patreon legends tonight: Teresa Kelly, Jimbo Eldor Jr., David Nimmo, and Francis Lucero. I'm very, very grateful to all of you. Please follow me on Patreon. It's the cost of 1 cup of coffee per week in a very insalubrious cafe. Thank you for joining me. Join me again on Wednesday at 9 p.m. UK time for the midweek mother of all talk shows. Good night.